Hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Um, just,
Hello.
hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Just yeah. So yeah, a very good evening to you all. Welcome to IUDI Global's third interaction of the series. Who am I, the designer? In short, WAID. So, well, I'm Debayan Chatterjee, an urban designer and architect from India, currently working with the Albert Speer and Partners in Frankfurt, and I'll be your evening host. So, WAID 2023 consists of a series of short reflection talks by various Indian urban designers working across the globe. In the last two sessions, the regions we covered were Middle East, Africa, Australia, and Europe. The third and this year's last session will focus on urban design practices in North and South America. Our three panelists will be sharing their personal experiences of working in those regions, along with their critical thoughts on how urban design practices are running there, and also how much opportunities we have as Indian urban designers to develop a career in those competitive regions. So, after today's session, we are hoping all the aspiring urban designers and fresh graduates who are and have been attending all our sessions will collectively have a better idea on how to develop urban design career outside India. Now, before starting today's discussion, it is important we talk about IUDI here. And for that, I would like to first invite Professor Arnav Dasgupta, our current president of IUDI. His unwavering support and guidance have been instrumental in igniting the passion for urban design in individuals like myself, my co-host Niyanta, and countless others across the country. Without his vision, this formation of the IUDI Global Group would not have been possible. Thank you, sir, for being here with us today, and it would be great to hear from you an overview of the Institute's activities in 2023 and a glimpse into the exciting plans that lie ahead in 2024. Sir, over to you.
Devayan, thank you again. It's lovely to be in touch with all of you, wherever you're placed. We are here a little bit of a loss in terms of figuring out where you might be at this point of time. But the fact that you have collected together at this instance is itself a great testimony to the fact that urban design in India and across the globe seems to be able to reach out to people, and people in turn seem to be reaching out to IUDI to try and be together for a while. And that itself, that I say, is a great achievement. This has not happened every time, last time, or successively. But this last 2 years, especially, I must say that we have tried to make a concerted effort in getting our own people who have been scattered all over the globe. Mitali, for example, has been there for quite some time. Niyanta has been there for some time now. Debayan has been fleeting around from UK to Doha to Germany to many other places. And we are hoping that while we are doing this, one by one, we will be able to get in touch with our own people, our very own people, not only from SP Urban Design, but also from people who are, from other institutes who happen to be elsewhere beyond our Indian boundaries. So that was the main purpose that we had with what we had set up the global group, the IUDI Global Group. We still call it the Global Group, not immediately a center or a chapter, and that I think is bureaucratic. We have to process our MOA to be able to make that happen. Our MOA was written 15 years back, right? And at that time, there were very few people outside Indian boundaries. Right now, that situation is no longer the same. We have many more people who have moved out and for whom we have to make sure that IUDI reaches out to them and they reach out back to us. So I feel that there is a necessity now to make sure that these connections are being made across the world. And then we also try to figure out whether urban design in our own country and urban design across our shores are happening in any different way or any distinctive way. To learn that and to be able to see the connections as well as the applications of urban design as a discipline into our professional practice, we are hoping that the IUDI Global Group is going to get instrumental. That is what Debayan had taken up as a challenge. And I know what it means to be able to get people together. You're yourself realizing what it means. We started with 4 people, we've moved up to 24, and we are hoping that down the line, we'll become more and more and more, let's say, participative. I am personally situated now in Kathmandu, not in Delhi or in India. And I'm trying my best to find a way to get connected. And actually getting connected in Kathmandu is not an easy job. You have to really do what we call as networking. And that is what is happening here. And I'm finding my own ways of getting hooked onto what all you will be able to present to us. The global group has given us 3 instances of coming together. 2 already have happened. The third one is just now happening. And these instances have given us exposures, like the one just said, across Africa, Europe, Middle East, and many other parts of the world. We are hoping that by next year, or by end of this year, by maybe next year, at the beginning of next year, we will ask the global group to hold a larger kind of a gathering, which moves us from a small, instance of 2 or 3 continents to a full span across the world, right from Australia to America. And like last year, we were hoping, not last year, but year before last, we were hoping that all of us in IUDI India will sit with all of you in this, what we call as a that infinitum will bring us, at par with people who are not within India itself. So that is an event that we look forward to. We also have for now about 10 centers, right, in India itself, which is making us reach across from to different corners, north, south, east, west. And we are hoping that the central zone will also join us very shortly. With these centers, we had started off with this idea of the National Conference of Urban Design. We started with Kollam down south 2 years back. Then we went to Goa just now, a few months back. And that was the second conference, which was the West Zone, and the West Zone conducted it beautifully for all of us. And we are hoping now that we will be next year going to Calcutta or the East Zone, and there we will also find some other partners who will be able to give us some insight. That is how we are hoping to rotate the idea of urban design and urban designing across all the centers that we have. So similarly with the global group, they are hosting us today in this event, and we're hoping that by next year again, with the IUDI Infinitum and much more from the global group itself, we will be getting some more events coming up to us. Apart from the conference, apart from the global group, we also have lecture series. We also have a very successful urban design thesis seminar now. Last year, we had a thesis seminar with more than 20 colleges. Because of COVID, we had to do it online. It was hosted by Mysore. And we are hoping that this year also, we would be doing the same, or next year at least. And the thesis seminar will bring us again together at an academic platform. The national conference is both academic as well as professional, but the thesis seminar has been primarily academic. But we are anyway looking for opportunities. We're hoping that the global group will give us some ideas, and we will bring all of you again with us. I don't want to stretch it too longer than this. Every one of us are keen to hear from you what you have to inform us with. And with that, I feel that we would like to welcome you first into our fold within IUDI. And we would then also like to hear from you your experience of what urban design means to the rest of the world. Thank you so much, Debayan, once again. Thank you, IUDI Global Group. And we are wanting now to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable insights. Now, there is a slight change in our session structure today. In our past talks, we delved into the unique urban design practices of 2 continents separately, dedicating individual sessions to each region. However, to infuse more dynamism and excitement into our discussion today, we have opted for a combined session focusing on the rich tapestry of urban design practices in North and South America into one session, and our talented IUDI Global Team member Niyanta will be the moderator for this upcoming discussion. So with over 8 years of diverse professional experience in architecture, urban design, and project management, Niyanta currently holds the position of Associate Architect at the NYC School Construction Authority. Previously, she served as a project manager and designer at World Monuments Fund for 2 years, excelling in multidisciplinary projects that encompass conservation, historic landscape architecture, hydraulic engineering, and urban design. Niyanta is a dedicated researcher, having contributed to various international platforms with published papers on Indian urban scenarios. Holding a master's degree in urban design from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, she is also a nationally recognized classical dancer with a passion for heritage walks and education. To discuss the UD practices in North America, we have two panelists here today. Mithali Ganguly is our first panelist, who is an architect, urban designer, and planner working in Berkeley, California, over 18 years of working in India, Singapore, and the US. The focus of her work has been on creating walkable communities and mixed-use transit-oriented development. Her projects have ranged from small-scale neighborhood infill to regional plans. She has a bachelor's degree in architecture and a master's in urban design, both from SPA New Delhi, and a master's in urban development and real estate from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. Our second panelist for the same region is Shreyoshi Banerjee, who is the Executive Director of NYC's Public Design Commission, which reviews new structures, art installations, and landscape architecture projects on city-owned property. She previously served as the Vice President of Urban Design for the NYC Economic Development Corporation, where she shaped the master plans for renovation and development of EDC assets. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she founded Design Corps, which arranged partnerships between volunteer architects and restaurants to design outdoor structures. Shreyoshi received a Bachelor of Architecture from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and a master's degree in urban design from the MIT. For South America region, we have Harsh Malhotra with us here today. He has over 5+ years of experience in urban design, planning, and architecture on projects in India, the Middle East, UK, Europe, and Argentina. His background is in architecture and urbanism, graduating from the Technical University of Delft. He joined Jacobs in 2021 and is currently working as an urban designer on projects in place-based planning, urban regeneration, and transit-oriented projects in the UK and Canada. Before joining Jacobs, his work experience ranged from strategic regional planning for a new Buenos Aires port, Argentina, to street and public realm design in Bangalore, India. He has experience in critical stages of design, development, and on-site coordination with site engineers. This diverse professional experience has enabled him to address stakeholders at various levels to create a holistic approach towards design and planning. Thank you, Niyanta, Mithali, Shreyoshi, and Harsh for agreeing to be part of this event. Looking forward to a great discussion today. Niyanta, over to you.
Hi, Divine. Thank you. A very good morning from across oceans to everyone, and happy Thanksgiving. You know, I just feel so nostalgic seeing so many names from IUDI and having connected after so long. But yes, I'm looking forward to this session, and thank you, Arnav sir and Debayan, for bestowing me with this opportunity. I think we have such, eminent panelists today, and I would like to begin with Mithali, who is right now in the far west. And Mithali, I think this is a question that is basically open to all three, but I'm going to start with Mithali now that here, I think this question is very, very evident and common. Like, you have pursued a second master's. I see your first master's was from SPA, and now you have the second master's that you pursued here in America. So what got you here, and what was your, I would say, inspiration or, the force behind getting the second master's degree, and why USA? And also, if you can throw some light on, the differences, or I would say if some comparison that you can shed between the two continents, like Asia or India. I mean, India and America.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Niyanta. And again, likewise, I just want to echo your thoughts that looking at the entire group here, it's great to see a lot of names, that I'm very familiar with. So again, thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, overall, I mean, I don't know, should I just talk about my work first, or should I just kind of look
Yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
you can
Definitely.
talk about your work and then we'll
and then kind of go on to that question? Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I graduated from my, the SPA Urban Design degree in 2001. And it's been many years since then. So I've worked on a lot of projects. But for the focus of this talk today morning, I'm going to try and just talk about only the work that I've done in the US. And I've broken that up roughly into two segments. So what you're seeing here right now is like from 2006 to 2017, I worked at Calthorpe Associates. So I don't know how many people like in this group are familiar with the term new urbanism, but that's kind of like the catch-all phrase in the US for basically common sense, walkable design and designing around the person as the, kind of who you're designing for and not around the car. But this was quite like a mind shift in the US because everyone likes their single family home and living in the suburbs and, just driving there, which had led to a lot of problems. So there's been this kind of conversion of ideas and designing around new urbanism. So when I worked at Calthorpe Associates, it was working closely with Peter Calthorpe, who's credited with being sort of like the author of new urbanism in the US. So that's why a lot of the projects that you see here, and this is just a snapshot, the projects that I worked on there all kind of were mainly focused around trying to promote the concept of TOD, like transit-oriented development, and kind of designing places that are more walkable, that have a mix of different housing types, ideally a mix of different uses together, which also promote walkability. So, and most of the work here was at different scales. So, at the very increment of designing at the neighborhood, we covered new town planning and kind of larger scale infill within existing urban growth boundaries, and also a lot of international work. So I'm just trying to show a snapshot here of some of these graphics that represent the kind of work that we did. But you'll notice that most of them are, and they were, more conceptual in design. So these were not like plans that were actually implemented over like a decade or two. These were conceptual plans. These also laid down design guidelines, and that was the nature of work that I covered there. But again, they all were following the principles of urbanism and TOD. And most of the projects were in the Middle East, some in Canada, a few definitely in the US, and I'll get to one of those descriptive projects later, but and also a solid chunk of work in China. And as you can, I'll move on to the China work. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So I just want to focus on some of the key aspects of many of these plans that we worked on. And these were, again, new town plans, and they were large-scale urban areas that were being designed. And this coincided with that time in China when there was massive and very rapid urbanization. So what was happening was that these cities were literally coming up within 10 years, and they were designed around the super block. So you would have each block about like half a kilometer by half a kilometer with like thousands of people at times living in high-rise towers. And at times, for reasons of security, they would just have 1 or 2 points of entry and egress, which led to the fact that as more and more people started driving, you would end up with abnormally wide streets. And that completely was going against, the traditional way of building in China. So our work in China was trying to, again, remind them to go back to the basics of what was existing in traditional Chinese cities. So over 5 years, we worked on like over 10 projects, and all of them tried to drive home this point of designing again at the scale of the human and more pedestrian scale, walkable urbanism. So what you see here was, again, the difference between a super block and the small grain block, like if you can like look at the two figure ground studies here. And another aspect was in the graphic right below those two is the concept of, again, mixed use development, not at the scale of the city, which means driving to different places, but mixed use development at the scale of the neighborhood or at the scale of the block. And also another factor that we felt was very crucial to remember is the importance of traditional urbanism. Like as we know, the Chinese civilization is one of the oldest in the world, but all those learnings of designing around climate, designing around natural ventilation and like solar access was completely getting lost. So it sounds funny, but we took the courtyard concept and we actually tried to design and space out high-rise development around the courtyard model. So it's still high-rise, it still has a lot of people living in it, but at least it has some shared space. It has a minimum of solar access for an hour a day. And it's all about like orienting like buildings in the correct way and just designing openings and access the correct way. So if you can go to the next slide. So a lot of these principles were kind of enshrined, and this I consider like quite an achievement considering it's China, which is so bureaucratic and it doesn't have much public involvement in projects, was to set up what was called as the manual for TOD for China, and this was adopted at a national level. And this defines like an 8-step process of how do you plan for TODs. Like this is for new town regions in which China was investing at the time a lot of money and effort into designing high quality transit. And what we found was that at times there was no synchronization between existing land uses, development patterns, where were the employment centers, in other words, the land use plan, and what they were designing in the form of TOD. So this was, again, it's all very common sense as an approach, but this was a mind shift for them of thinking about, first of all, what are your natural assets that you need to preserve, including watersheds, agricultural land, apart from just natural features, then how you layer on areas where people are, where the job hubs are, and then how would you kind of identify the key like connectors or like corridors, and then design transit at different levels of intensity. And they in turn will support certain population intensities. So this was, for example, what you're seeing on the screen right now on the left-hand side. This was a project that won like an award in China and also won in the US, surprisingly, by the Congress for New Urbanism as kind of a way for regional planning to happen. The next slide, please. As another kind of contrasting project, so that, as you can see, is all very conceptual. These are very large-scale plans, but there were also projects in the US which were a little bit different. So this is an example of a typical American project that I worked on, in which the concerns were much, much like lesser about increasing the number of housing units and just accommodating more population, but it was more about how do we make these places function better. So this is an example of a site, like you can see in the photo in the middle. It's actually a salt pan. This was an area where salt was collected and then allowed to kind of gradually like evaporate to basically use the salt for industrial purposes. But this is within a 15-minute drive of over 20,000 jobs, which is in Silicon Valley. So it's like a vastly underutilized piece of land. And this project looks at how to kind of work with the environment, also kind of be more resilient for the future. So design around constructed wetlands, but at the same time trying to get a right mix of housing types, which would try and balance out, the jobs in the region. So a lot of the projects in the US, these were kind of the primary, the things that we were concerned about: climate resilience, and trying to, again, build housing near jobs, try and get people out of their cars, and trying to prove that through raw data. So in other words, we had to do a much stronger job of convincing people and decision makers than in China. So if you can go to the next slide. So after 10 solid years of working here, I kind of was, hoping for something different, even though all that work had been very exciting. As I said, a lot of international projects and travel, which is not a bad thing. But it was slightly ironic that I was working for one of the founders of New Urbanism in the US, but most of the work was being done outside the country. So just to kind of understand, working at a very, very local level, I shifted to another firm in 2017 called Opticos Design, and I'm still there. So it's been like 6 years plus now. Now, this was a complete shift because almost all the projects are smaller scale and they are local. Like in the sense you have to involve community decisions. We follow what's called as a design charrette process, in which you literally set up like a temporary office in communities and like design there like live, literally with community feedback, people giving their opinions, pinning up your half-done work, getting feedback and adjusting it. So very, very community-led, in other words. And this is basically the fundamental way of designing around projects. We also work almost exclusively in infill projects. And even though it's a mix of urban design, some of this work is also large-scale planning. But again, the shift, from just designing what you think works best for the environment, in this case, the community input and what people really want becomes, the primary driver of the design. These are often plans which are for 20 to 40 years in duration, and these also have legal authority. So they have to be backed up by zoning standards. So that's why getting the community buy-in is very important. And as you can see in the photo in the middle, not just designing in public and reporting back and getting consensus, but also doing like slightly fun things to engage people, such as this, like we set up a parklet in which people could have coffee conversations about what should happen in their downtown, and give feedback through a dot exercise and other such, very simple but effective interactive exercises. So if you can go to the next slide. This again just provides a snapshot of the range of projects that we work on. And this can involve, again, as I said, it's infill. So at times it doesn't seem so comprehensive as sketching a plan for an entire new town. But like as the plan graphic in the middle shows you, all the brown buildings are new, but all the gray buildings are existing. So it's looking very closely at underutilized land, at how land uses are changing, and thinking 20 years in the future. So it's very different from the kind of let's just make a beautiful plan that can work well and operate with TOD. We are still designing around transit and walkable communities, but it's just very, very real, in other words. At the same time, what you see in the panel, like on the left, we also have to write the zoning standards for a lot of these projects. So in other words, you can't just be conceptual. You really need to tie in and work collaboratively with economists, with transportation specialists, and all these people, because this has a legal authority and it's going to actually influence what is going to get built in that area over the next 20 years. So just moving very quickly on to the next couple of slides. This basically also shows the kind of planning work is also different when I'm working in this current firm. You're looking at citywide regions and how different housing types can work or how development should happen. But at the same time, we are cross-checking our work, both in terms of physical fit and economic feasibility, right down to the building scale. So this has been quite an interesting shift in that we are designing for cities, but at every minute, we are aware of the exact building types that can fit on existing lots. So in other words, the plan can actually be implemented. And that has been the primary focus of my work over the last 6 years. So I'm not sure if I'm at time, Niyanta. I think I am. So I can just skip the next 2 slides. You can just go over them very quickly. This will just cover some of the volunteering work that I've done on the side. But if we can just pause on the very last slide. This is just an interesting project that I worked on, in which this is with a charity called New Story, and they were involved in 3D printing. So if we have time at the end, I can come back to it. But this also showed how kind of, mass scale housing production can happen. This was a project in Mexico. And essentially, with the help of a 3D printer, you're building low-cost communities at scale with printing a house in like roughly 24 hours. And that's what it looks like. So that's kind of the snapshot of my work. And now, Niyanta, should I just kind of answer the question that you initially asked?
I think I'm going to move to the next panelist and I'll come back to you.
Okay, that totally works.
I'll give you a few minutes to, consolidate on this.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, Mithali, that was really nice. I mean, I was looking at the scale of your projects. It's just so interesting. And you have like moved so many continents and also worked across so many countries. So that was pretty interesting. I would like to welcome our next panelist. That is Sriyoshi Banerjee. She's from New York, and she's worked with the private and now currently with the government agency. So let's hear Sriyoshi. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you again, everybody, for having me here and inviting me. And Mithali, I'm so intrigued by all of your work. And it's wonderful in these instances to make these connections and keep in touch and just learn more. I would love to. Thanks again for your presentation. So mine is less content focused, but I would love to talk to you about my journey and answer any questions. So I, for my own self, have been doing a lot of reflection on what exactly is it that I have done in this last decade since I graduated, and what is it that I want to do in the future. And I did a word cloud of my own biography just to understand like what really pops up. And some things that have happened in the last few years for me that have really shaped me is not only just to focus on urban design and architecture and working in agencies that focus on those, but also entrepreneurship and finding opportunities, building partnerships. COVID-19 really was a very unique and, of course, unfortunate time in New York City, but it also led to many different innovations across the board. So just the journey from graduating as an urban designer for my master's to then now, I just want to take you through it and just give you stories along the way. So I hope you find that helpful. Next slide. Okay, great. So so a little bit about how I started. So I got my bachelor's of architecture in 2010, and I really thought I would be practicing in like a traditional architecture firm. I started my career in Raphael Vignoli Architects, which was really unique and wonderful. And then you know, the culture, the culture in the US for architecture can be quite intense at times. And this was one of the firms that was the most intense and notorious for like that. So working from like midnight to 6 a.m., many days, I really learned a lot about how it is to work on really star architecture firms and what that brings along with it. So then a part of that just effort in being in that mode, really working on wonderful buildings, but also feeling like I want more impact and more community input and just a closer touch with that made me want to go back and get my master's at urban design. And that's when I went to MIT. And that photo is actually when I went back to Ahmedabad and Bangalore and all these other places back home in India to do planning as part of my coursework. And that's one of the things that always draws me is figuring out a way for equitable development and inclusive of multiple voices. So that's been a theme across my journey of how to go work for places that value that. So then after my graduation, I went to Datner Architects for 3 years, and that photo is of a ULURP zoning envelope. So we worked at Datner on multiple mixed-use housing developments, as well as small affordable housing buildings. So I really learned the housing typology very closely, working from schematic design all the way through construction administration. And that is also where I met EDC, which is from 2016 to 2020, 6 years. I spent a significant time of time there because I learned of EDC while I was at Datner. They were actually one of my clients. So I will get into that a little bit later. And then from my time at EDC, which is a New York City Economic Development Corporation, it's a quasi-government agency. They do a lot of work in neighborhood development, but also economic development and real estate. They also own land, so they can develop with their own control of what they want to see there, what is the most realistically feasible, and what is also lucrative and can bring back profits to the city. Oh, sorry, can you all hear me? I'm having a bit of an echo from someone.
I would just request everybody else to mute themselves.
Oh, I think that just might have gone away. Okay, and then that takes me to today, which I can talk about the Public Design Commission in more detail. But after 6 years at EDC, there came an opportunity to lead a small agency that has oversight over everything built on city land, and it's been quite the journey. For the last year and a half, I've been in that role. I can talk a little bit about that too. But go ahead, next slide. So some of the values I really think about bringing with me to my work and my partnerships with others is thinking about what is culturally conscious design. Really, by that, I think I still have to find the right definition, but really being trained in architecture and urban design and looking at all different scales with a multitude of stakeholders means that there's something about the place that you have to be really mindful of. And for me, even in New York City, the culture is different in every single neighborhood. So how you're designing for a recreation center in the Bronx versus how you're designing for a High Line through Manhattan are two different strategies. So culturally conscious has been something that is important to me to make sure the right voices are at the table and like the right type of community engagement is planned. A lot of my work involved writing scopes of work while I was at EDC for consultants to implement. So it was totally the opposite side, thinking about what the right team is, what the right structure for studying a location in a neighborhood is that will yield the best results, the best master plan, the best building. So this is really some of the values that I came out of, like working behind the scenes on the things that get done, 10 years down the line. Disrupting the norm is something that I really, I think, tapped into my rebellious self when I was younger in my career, but I didn't have the platform for back then. But while learning all the standards and the ways of doing things, I would always have an itch just to be like, what else can I do? I really appreciate architecture and traditional planning and design, but there's something I'm seeking for, which is how to connect partners and do something unique, do something different. Whenever it involves social justice or like amplifying the voices of those that are not really heard, that's when I light up. So I know there's like a there for me to really think about how my work can benefit those that are left behind. And that's something that I hope to pursue in the future decades. But for right now, I think in New York City, it's been really helpful to try and understand the framework, think about what can like just disrupt that, like how can we take it to the next level, how can we innovate? So that's something I really like to think about in my work. And in terms of collaborative leadership, design core, which you mentioned earlier, I can speak to in a minute, but sometimes as architects and urban designers, we're trained to be holistic thinkers, and we don't even know we have some of the skills we have. That's been like my theme of the last year in my leadership journey. You learn how to read drawings, how to draw, your technical aspects, how to do so many different things, think creatively about how a place is born. But then you also know things about how to work with people, strategy, diplomacy, how to negotiate. You can really think and have this design thinking cap on. So that's something that I discovered in the last few years, where I've tried to tap into that and think about how to leverage unique ideas and implement them so there's social good and impact. Next slide. So stepping into the 6 years I spent at EDC, I want to speak a little bit more about what EDC does. So I was hired as the first urban designer within the New York City Economic Development Corporation. That will only make sense if I speak a little bit more about the broader aspects. So EDC is a quasi-government agency that has multiple divisions, and I was in the planning division. So the planning division engages communities in planning for their future. They meet with them in ways that both happen before a project begins to ask them what they want to see in their land, but they also engage with them as a project goes through the urban land review processes, which New York City mandates. Something unique about EDC is that it leverages the city's public assets and coordinates the programs and investments across agencies. And in doing so, it kind of has multiple levers to catalyze neighborhood business and quality job growth. And then it also advances strategic development and infrastructure projects that help build vibrant, livable, and inclusive neighborhoods. There's a whole transportation division. And lastly, they promote public access, economic opportunity, and resilience across the vast government. So vast city landscape, I mean. So then it was about 50 team members, but when I began, there was no urban designer. There was no in-house architecture team of sorts that really works on visualizing for decision-making. So that became really the thing I was brought in to do. So where there were all of these projects you see on the screen, for example, the carved away building, that beautiful rendering of the life science research campus. About 6 years ago, when I had began, we were starting to think about this Brookdale Hospital campus, like what could go there. We know that there could be a transaction there where they consolidate and the rest of the campus can become something else. So 100 massing models later, a lot of different interactions with the real estate team later, just like last month, there was a press release about this future-facing Spark campus, which is a life science, education, and really unique research campus that's coming. But to get there, it took about a decade, and a decade in various different places. So for me, it's fascinating to be able to be engaged in these projects at EDC, like 10 years ago now, 7 years ago now, because even at Datner, I was working on a campus that now is coming through to PDC for my approval. But these things happen. It takes a long time. So when you're invested in this profession, you have to kind of really see so many projects through, and it becomes really rewarding. So part of my experience at EDC, leading visualization for decision making around what the land use would be, what's the programming, what are the site strategies, it was just really exciting. So many different projects, so many different complex teams, and coordinating with public and private partners. And another thing that we really did was work with a lot of consultants. So New York City has a wealth of amazing talent, architecture, urban design, planning, and to be able to do an urban design RFP, and to really, I'll explain what that means in a minute, but to be able to request competitive proposals and see that process through for like 3 years, I got to really know the kind of firms that are out there, got to evaluate their work, got to understand if they would be right for like the experience at EDC. So then they became on-call urban designers. So every time we would have a need to say, for example, do like the Spark campus, beyond the work I can do within a week, and I would do like multiple projects at once, we would hire out. So I would draft the scope of work, I would interview, and then we would create a work plan and we would implement. So across my 6 years there, I did that for the Greenway Master Plan, the Spark Campus, Broadway Junction Transportation Planning. It was fascinating to be on the kind of back end of these things there. And I think my work at EDC led me to my current role. And I think there's a slide in between, so I'll get there. But this was really something that has been my favorite aspect of the last decade. Hands down, I love working at the Economic Development Corporation, because places like that really could value the skills of an urban designer and architect. And you're one of a kind, and versus in an architecture firm, there's many of your expertise available. And I only bring that up because it was very helpful to feel valued and kind of have the independence to craft a team at EDC. Because part of the things that I just want to be transparent with is because urban design and architecture can be really, really competitive. So like decades ago at Vignoli, it was quite difficult for me to be like, okay, am I in the right field? Is this right for me? Because it was very tricky and fast paced. So all of the time I had spent trying to question if I'm in the right place kind of got healed at EDC, because I was like, wait a second, this is not only like the right place, but I'm thriving here and I'm really enjoying myself. So you really have to find the right fit for you as you grow in your career, because if I was still at Vignoli really learning this construction documents and like becoming an expert at it, I'm sure I could have, but I wouldn't have been perhaps thriving in it or enjoying it as much as I enjoy like the work that I do now. So that's just an just like a side to like talk about like the last 10 years. But next slide. So part of my time of feeling that kind of confidence and leadership within an agency led me to be able to pitch an idea. Because when you're part of a big firm and you're one of many, it's very hard to get your ideas across. And for me, the one place I found very different was EDC, where if you have an idea and you can implement it and you can gather the resources, you can go ahead and do it. They're open to that. And I'm sure other agencies and even places across the globe can be open to that. So it's very important to push and be like, hey, I have this idea. I think it'll really benefit people. And then just see what happens. So for me, what happened during COVID was that I had a lot of partnerships with the American Institute of Architects that I held with my work with them. And I also was seeing all the restaurants shut down and people really struggling for keeping up with their livelihood. In fact, my family is one of restaurateurs. So my direct family at the time was thinking about, how are we going to build this outdoor dining thing? What does this even mean? There's like a slew of code that the Department of City Planning and DOT put out there. This is the kind of structure you can build. But for restaurants that are struggling and in the middle of an emergency, reading through all those guidelines became really tricky. And plus there's jargon out there. So how can like a restaurateur understand like city code and do it in a way that like keeps their business alive? So that became the problem of that moment. And I felt architects can help here. We are trained to read code and translate that into buildings. So in this moment when architects were really eager to help, we connected the people that were eager to help through a matchmaking platform. We built it out to restaurants that wanted to sign up so they could build the sheds that you see on the screen. And at the time, this was literally a matter of survival for them because their businesses couldn't function inside. So this particular design core effort lasted during the pandemic and helped about 100 restaurants, and there were over 80 firms and architects signed up. It was just very rewarding to see the kind of power of collaboration. And also, I think as a result of this, I was hooked onto this whole entrepreneurship thing. Like, what other ideas are out there that we can all do collaboratively if we can leverage each other's creativity? Next. So then that brings me to 2022, which was last year. Part of me like still pinches myself because I'm in this role because it was very unexpected for me. So basically every turn of an administration in New York City, every 4 to 8 years, there's a new mayor. And some of these roles where you are leaders of agencies are mayoral appointees. So for me to be tapped to, try to run an agency was extremely out of the left field at the time. Maybe because I personally saw myself a certain way and others saw me differently, the whole thing about going back to reflecting upon your values. But I realized if I were to take this role, it would be a dramatic shift in not necessarily doing the work, imagining like all these different possibilities, but rather a leadership position running an agency that is on the complete oversight end. So what PDC does, basically, they run a monthly public review process. So there are 11 commissioners, experts who meet pro bono and vote on projects. So anything built on city land has to be approved by this agency. So I came into it really thinking about how we can be creative here, how we can really help demystify what the Public Design Commission does, how we can ensure equity across all boroughs. So it was like a really interesting role. Next slide. So the PDC essentially is located in City Hall. It's in the attic. It used to be the caretaker's apartment. It's practically a museum in there. It's a very small space, but it's full of artifacts because before it was the Public Design Commission, it was the Art Commission. And from 1898 to now, it has evolved in its many iterations, but it has jurisdiction over all the public projects. So the projects I was working on at EDC and even other projects, parks, now come to this agency for approval at various different levels. So for me, I think the PDC is really, really important, even though some people, and I've fought this over the last year, may see it as like a bureaucratic red tape point, but it truly is not, because the before and afters I've seen happen with some of these projects where an unbiased group of 13 commissioners that look at this and they're like, how come this doesn't have enough accessibility at this corner? Or what is the programming here it's missing, like a public restroom? Or, there's many things. The ADA access ramp is not at the best view as like the primary stairs. Can we create a more cohesive environment that can really invite people and be universally accessible? So all of those things play out. We see about 80 to 100 projects a month, and small team, we're like 7 people. So we have that is the foundation, how to approve projects, make it the most equitable, the most performance driven. And really we're in the middle of like 18 other stakeholders who've worked on this for years, but PDC is a checkpoint. And it's a checkpoint that is open for public testimony. So we become almost the last resort if there's something coming up in a community that the community board has voted yes, but there's other community members that don't like it, we end up coming here. So that becomes something that I've seen as a really critical aspect. The PDC helps uphold design values and represents every New Yorker. And it even has oversight over every other agency. So agencies often look to us to make sure their projects go fast and seamless, but also we are an unbiased entity. So I think that's my last slide. If you hit next, it's probably nothing. Okay, yeah. So I will end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sriyoshi. I'll quickly jump to Harsh. Harsh, without getting into more details, please, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all good?
Yeah.
Okay,
You're
perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me, first of all, to this panel. I'm really proud and happy to be, joining some brilliant people on the panel. And thank you, everybody, for coming to this conversation, and also to the team at IUDI. And I'll start with my journey as well. It's a bit less content driven, and I'll try to be as quick as I can. Right. So, and the whole purpose of this thing is to basically talk about the journey and how one step led to another step, and how I basically built my career to what it is today. As you all know about New Delhi being the capital of India, it's a very hustling, bustling, community-based, very tightly knit city. It's very highly urbanized and dense, and I grew up in all of this around the history, architecture, and food. So it basically became like quite a sort of a foundation piece for me to start thinking about how built form is, how design is. And I always was, because I was born and raised in a community like this, I always wanted to sort of become an architect, and I wanted my work to have a bigger impact on the community that I designed for. Could we go to the next slide? So that's where my journey started. I was very lucky. I ended up actually doing my bachelor's in architecture from UK. It's a very small, not a small, that small city in south of UK, England, and it's very much the professors, the colleagues who were studying and with me at the time always focused on the concept of environment, looking at the context, understanding what's happening around you. So I was always conscious of that, and my design always spoke of this. And a lot of the projects that we did were not just environmentally conscious, but they were also community based conscious. It looked at what was the current context of that particular place was. And I designed a lot of projects which basically were different types, went from private housing all the way to art galleries and community centers, food banks, which are becoming quite a phenomenon at the moment in Western world. So my process in this was always to design around the community and understand what we can do. Could we go to the next slide, please? So which led me to one of the journeys, which was when I finished my graduation, I ended up actually moving to India back, and I ended up working with a brilliant architecture company called Maya Praxis, and they're located in Bangalore. I started as an architect, but what I really enjoyed with the work that they were doing was they were doing something different, which was they were usually, like, architects are not necessarily talking about infrastructure in that much of detail, and that is not something an architect has a say on in the city. And Maya Praxis was one of the few companies that were doing that. The whole point of working on these projects was to give accessibility to the people, because a lot of times that usually doesn't happen in our country. And the projects that we were working on were predominantly foot bridges, pedestrian bridges, but the pedestrian bridges had a bigger program and a bigger impact. And this is exactly what we started doing with the government of Bangalore and in Karnataka, which we basically started talking to them about. Hey, think about something beyond the program of what you are asking us to do. And it actually had a lot of impact in terms of how the public realm design work actually started with that. We made the government conscious of, it's not just about, this pedestrian bridge and where you end up at, but also it extends beyond that. Small baby steps, but we ended up actually engaging the government quite a lot more. Could we go to the next slide? Which brings me to my master's, which I wanted to pursue. Netherlands in itself is sort of like a living laboratory of all the new urbanism that we talk about. And it was pretty much studying and living that experience of what urbanism can be. I spoke on my previous slide about the experiences of infrastructure plus in terms of our design. And Netherlands in itself is the best example of that, because the water in itself, the green and the blue infrastructure that they have in itself is their asset. They use that infrastructure as an asset and go beyond that in developing their cities. And they have a very good layered approach of how things are. And people, of course, come on the top of that. So I was very lucky. I got into Delft, I feel. And it was, the 2 years of the work that I did there was pretty much actually trying to understand how can I bring the urban element, the public realm, the living, day-to-day living, alongside the infrastructure planning, which often in itself is missing, and we don't actually, as an architect, sometimes don't have a say in as well. So developing that, I kind of kept on working on things like this, and dealt in a lot of regional based planning, street pretty much street planning, and regional center planning. And that basically led to another opportunity for me. Could we go to the next slide? Which is Buenos Aires. It's a bit far away and a lot of traveling, of course, and a totally different continent. But when I was studying at Delft, we had an opportunity of engaging the city of Buenos Aires, especially in the Spezia Público, which is basically the urban space ministry. And they actually approached, my professors, and we as researchers went actually to Buenos Aires. It was an extended program. It was not connected with university. It was a total separate thing, and we were actually asked to develop the port of Buenos Aires. Port of Buenos Aires could be in anything, in any most of the major cities, going to be just, redeveloping an area and having like a lot of like a downtown development, condos, buildings, and stuff like that. However, right in the port of Buenos Aires, there is a very big slum called Villa 31, which is in itself is a very inhumane way of naming areas in Argentina, which means they literally call it Villa 31. So they just give the name of that slum a number. They don't even give them a name of the area. So we had to balance that. We had to balance sort of the high scale planning, but also keep these people, informal people, into our consideration, how we are going to bring them and make them a part of a city. And as I said, we actually use mobility as a way of breaking that barrier. We use that infrastructure solution as a barrier, but at the same time, we also started to use the community and how the impact that infrastructure can have on different scales. So from port design all the way to slum redevelopment, having a BRT system that will go through that slum and how it will help and alleviate those for those people. Could we go to the next slide? Or is that my last final slide? Oh, I do. And it's pretty much basically led me to working as an urban designer for Jacobs. Jacobs is a multinational company. We're working a lot in similar frame of, we have cities and places team where we are working a lot of urban scale architecture projects, but I am predominantly focused on that infrastructure solutions plus. And so I've worked with a lot of transport planners, and hydraulic, water planners. And what we do is we try to bring those kind of layers together, and we try to facilitate that conversation between, various segments of the city. Some of the projects here we have are in Dublin, and Hartlepool. Again, it was pretty much working with the city, and understanding how we could basically alleviate the current problems that they have been having for such a long time, and creating a new form of urbanism, working with our transport planners and the community that preside over there. So that is for my journey at the moment. I'm in Canada. I'm doing similar kind of work with Jacobs, but it's always been focused on community. It's always been focused on how infrastructure can actually to those solutions. So that's all from me, and hopefully I can add more to it when we speak about in the panel.
Thank you so much, Harsh. It's just amazing to see such diverse projects and, having spread across continents, but there's this common language of urban design that binds all of us together. I want to start with Mitali here. Mitali, you had, different scales of projects and you've worked, at so many places. Can I request everybody else to please mute themselves? All right. Mitali, coming back to the same question, why second master's? And I think it was not in urban design, right? But why did you choose to come here? Why the US, and why exploring further into urban design? And yeah, if you can, just shed some light on it.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Thanks, Priyanka. So, I kind of graduated from my bachelor's. Like in India, I worked for a year or so. Then I did my urban design. And among the people I see on the panel, I had some pretty exemplary teachers and professors, like with Professor Kanvinde and Professor like Arunav and Professor Ranjit Mitra, and many others like Katie and all. So I felt very equipped, and it was a very sophisticated way of learning about urban design. So it's not that there was any inadequacy in my education that led me to pursue a second master's. It was frankly just like a string of events that happened together. So after completing my MArch in urban design in India, I worked on several different projects, both at like larger scales and also research-based. But then after that, I moved to Singapore. And over there, I honestly could not get any urban design work. So just because of at that time, the scale of the city and the nature of projects and stuff like that. So after working in architecture, even interiors and workplace design for over a year, let's just say I was at a low point. And frankly, it was more on impulse than anything else that I applied, for like to Harvard. I'd missed all the other deadlines. This was more of, look, this is the last year that my GRE is valid for. And, that's also a testament to the fact that I had qualified and gotten decent grades in my GRE a few years back. But I was satisfied with my urban design training and the kind of projects I was working in India. So it was actually shifting to a different country where I couldn't pursue enough urban design work that led me to apply, frankly, on a whim. And then when I got in, I was also recently married, so it was a year and a half of long distance and stuff like that. So not the easiest, but it wasn't like a well-planned conscious decision. But that being said, I was very happy with the outcome of my master's in the US. So that I wanted to select something that built on what I had already learned. So it's basically a mix of planning courses and real estate. That being said, I realized for the first semester in that real estate is not for me to practice in, like, even though I'm sure I could have made a lot more money. So I kind of, invested all the effort in the master's, and it was a great experience. I got, I would say I learned about affiliated fields, which helped me even today. So that includes everything from, macro and microeconomics to real estate development, how the numbers work, to kind of obviously the history of urban planning in the US, which I wasn't sure of, I wasn't very aware of before that, and some other kind of subjects which otherwise I would not have been engaged in. Also in the US, you can get to share courses with other affiliate universities. So for example, some of my courses, I was studying basically in Harvard, I was enrolled in Harvard, but I took courses at MIT. And also I found that, that kind of cross departmental interaction was in a way the biggest benefit of doing a master's in the US. So you had also, I think, asked about what are the comparisons in the way of teaching. So if I were to compare the urban design teaching in SPA and also what the way I was taught in the US, frankly, it was very similar because a lot of it was group-based. A lot of it was kind of the Socratic method that you present your work. It's not that you just sit and take notes. There's a bit of that, obviously, but you have to do a lot of presentation, a lot of collaboration, and also a lot of kind of deeper thinking. It's not just churning it in. You need to kind of make an effort to make your work stand out. So I felt very well equipped, going into like a master's course in the US with what I had learned from my UD masters in India. So that kind of was a validating point as well. And so otherwise, in terms of related subjects, there were, again, opportunities for crafting your thesis and other like projects, working on projects which are not just hardcore urban design. So that's another interesting difference that I found from the Indian model of teaching. Like you can move between departments, you can like attend courses from other departments much more easily than you can in India.
That's really interesting to know. Also, I'm also here in New York. The string of events that led me to come from India here, and I know what struggle it has been to be where I am right now. I also want to ask you, do you think getting a second master's in the country that you'll be living in and working would definitely help you or build a momentum?
Absolutely. I don't think you'll get a job without it. I mean, just speaking very bluntly. So even though people were appreciative and, kind of my past experience and my, limited work experience at the time and my degree from, SPA was enough to get me into a course that selected just like, I think 12 or 15 people, but it wasn't enough to get me a job, I'm pretty sure. So, it helped in just understanding the local context. It also, frankly, it kind of adds a stamp, which gets you into interviews and all of that. But, one thing I will say is that working in the US, and I've been working here for a long time now, is that beyond getting into your first interview and your first job, honestly, no one really cares about whether like you're from Harvard or from the local community college. Just being very honest about that. Like, I think the name of the college matters much more still in Asia, but in the US, it's honestly about the work that you've done and, your portfolio essentially of projects. So, but you do need to get into your first job. So, that's why I felt that for me, getting the US Masters was pretty critical, and it opened a lot of doors. You also build a lot of contacts, even though I studied on the East Coast and I worked on the West Coast. So a lot of those contacts have not really instantly fused into jobs, but it does open up and help you understand, the local market and where you'd like to work.
Yes. I don't think we have enough time, but I would just like to continue this because it's pretty interesting. And, I've also been in a similar situation. When I came here, it's going to be 7 years now. I just had a master's in urban design and I was wearing that scholarly badge thinking, oh, I'm from, SPA. I'm going to get through any good firm over here. I came here and I did not want to study further. I wanted to explore my options. So here I come. I started in a very small firm in New Jersey that accelerated, my coming into New York. And I worked with a private agency here in New York and built my contacts. And it did take me a few years. And not that it's a choice, I think, that I made that I wanted to be here, but sometimes the situations also kind of push you into where you are. So currently I'm with New York City, School Construction Authority, not doing urban design, but doing architecture. And I absolutely feel that having a second master's from, had I had a second master's, that would have definitely helped build me the sort of networking that anybody else who studied from here would have. And also, since you got married and then you came here, how did your, the visa process, or how did that work out for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's also an interesting point for getting a master's. Again, I'm not giving the romantic version. I'm giving the very kind of, down to earth reason for why many people choose to do a second master's, even if they have one before, is that, again, for you to work in the country. At that time, frankly, I wasn't sure about whether I'll be working in the US. At that time, I think till my last semester, my vision was going back to Singapore because I was actually, like that is what we had planned. But essentially, once you get into a master's, it just facilitates the visa process. So in other words, like you get the student visa, which is a F1, but the F1 visa enables, and things may have changed. I'm talking about a long time back, but the F1 visa enables you to work for a year. And the thing is, it gets you again into the door, right? So once you've worked even like 6 months, I think with anyone on this group, like you are able to prove yourself. It's not that we're lacking in any skills, but then you basically get that approval to either change a job towards something which is more permanent or look for something in a different part of the country. But that initial work experience gets on your resume. So that, that F1 visa is much more easy to get, I think, if you're already studying, than applying directly for an H-1B visa, which is a work visa. So after working in an, on an F1, you can convert. Like basically, if you've proven yourself to a firm, they apply for the H-1 for you on your behalf. And I just think that that is a more straightforward process. I'm sure people have followed other avenues as well. Again, this wasn't part of a plan. It just happened in steps. But that's how it's kind of worked out for me. And it was also interesting because for some time I supported my husband, who's in IT and earns like double my salary or whatever. But for 6 months, just because of the visa situation, he was my dependent on an H4. And that was in its own way an interesting experience. So, before he could kind of apply for an H1 the conventional way and get a job here. So, yeah.
So basically your spouse was enjoying the fruits of all your hard work.
For some time, yeah.
Yes, students who get the F1, they get at least 3 years extension now.
Oh, I see. That's great. Mm-hmm.
Yes, they can be with any firm for 3 years, and in those 3 years, if they're lucky enough, they can get, if the firm is happy with them, they can definitely sponsor them. I don't want to demotivate if there are students who are looking to, apply here, or like in my case, I came here because I could get a dependent visa. So I was very flexible to work. I did not have to pursue a second education. So that was my entry to this country, and I had the freedom to explore. So right now, as I said, it's my husband who is locked in. I am the one who's enjoying the fruits, and I have the freedom to move around and explore other opportunities. But I think that was also, I wanted to, people who are here and hearing this, I also wanted to throw some light on that. Like, getting into US is not easy, I would say now, especially after COVID. But yes, if you should definitely get a second, a second master's or pursue a higher education. Mithali, also, I want to ask you, you did mention about it, but how is urban design practice different from India, like here in the US, or especially on the West Coast?
Yeah, sorry, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so I have frankly limited urban design experience in India, but I worked on several projects, again, with SPA professors, so they were very well led. And this was right after graduating. So I kind of worked on 2 6-month projects, and they were like super interesting. One of them was working in Old Delhi. And I've also grown up in Delhi, so I'm both very familiar with, and I love all the things which people are scared of, doing in Delhi, which is diving straight into Chandni Chowk and kind of, enjoying the food and stuff like that. So it was like 6 months of documenting and kind of, working in a place like that. And then in addition to that, it was also working in a smaller place outside Ranchi in Bihar. So, not kind of your conventional, like kind of high profile urban design projects, but very meaningful in their own way. So, but then after that, I haven't worked on, I've worked on architectural projects in India, but not any other type of urban design work. But I can kind of summarize the one difference that I think does exist, and anyone on the panel, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the aspect of community involvement. And Sriyoshi referred to this as well, and so did Harsh, like especially with the firm that I'm working on right now, Like it needs to kind of get community approval before you can move ahead and the plan becomes real. Like it's not adopted by city council unless it has like a good show of support from the community. So, I mean, at least in my work experience in India and from what I hear from other friends, there isn't that much of large scale or in-depth involvement of the people for whom you're designing, at a neighborhood scale or even at other areas. And apart from that, I think maybe the speed at which projects happen, I found it to be pretty slow in the US compared to China, where I worked, and also in the Middle East. The Middle East is kind of crazy for very different reasons. But in China, everything was very fast. In the US, it's, I would say, very slow. But again, I'm not sure about where India falls as a comparison in just the timeline of projects getting completed or adopted or built, essentially. And another thing that I feel over the time that I've worked in the US, some things that I've seen change has two things stand out. First of all, like a large part of the US is still in denial about like climate change and things like that. I mean, not in the areas where I've worked. And the culture is very different along the coasts, whether it's the East Coast and the West Coast, and what happens in the heart of the country. I think it's like not a secret, but that deeply influences the kind of work that you can do. So it's weird that it's not like, say, again, comparing with China, which is autocratic and has its own problems, but it's like one set of rules apply everywhere. Over here, there's much more local control over the outcomes. And at times, even the political leanings and the way the community feels, all of that ties into the extent of work that you can influence. So, kind of we can get away with far more what's called progressive work and like transit-oriented development and walkable communities and kind of, all that good stuff along in a coastal situation, but not the same thing may not work in Texas, where everyone wants to drive a truck. So, I would say it's good that there's a lot of community involvement, but at times it also works against itself, so it's like a mixed bag, but that, you have those kind of issues working in every country. So those have been the things that I've observed in the US in recent times. So there's a lot more focus on resiliency, final acceptance of climate change, designing with that in mind, and also displacement. So in all of my public sector projects right now, or I would say almost all my projects, we collaboratively work with a range of other specialists, right? Like whether it's an economist, you have like climate science specialists, you have sociologists in some cases, you obviously have transportation engineers and kind of civil engineers. So everyone is kind of analyzing and contributing their part to the project. And our role is kind of synchronizing all the information and gleaning what we can from it with public input. But increasingly, I'm finding that on most of these projects, it's a requirement of the RFP that you involve like some degree of resiliency study and recommendations, and also for anti-displacement, because there's been so much historic redlining and, like relocation of people and basically inequity in housing outcomes and development outcomes, that now carrying out displacement and, recommendations for anti-displacement is a critical part of our work.
Excellent. I think to continue on this and to add on this, I would like to bring Sriyoshi. Sriyoshi, since you have been working with the government agency and you have spearheaded such important projects when you were at the NYC EDC, how do you see the involvement of community growing in New York City?
It's a great question. I think it's almost stepping back and asking, like, how do you define community? Because we found that while there's a lot of structures in place for community boards and who's part of those community boards, there's also this other community which doesn't get involved in those things. So I've been noticing that while the CBs are really important, participation and also getting their formal approval so that it can move through the city processes for getting built, there's this other aspect that we interact with a lot at PDC because they come and testify as part of the Public Design Commission on a monthly basis. They might be like, yes, I understand the CB exists, but this is my viewpoint and it wasn't considered. It's always like the other viewpoints that may not be part of the consensus making that end up becoming the loudest. And I've encountered that a lot with controversial projects such as artwork or historic preservation projects, that there's always the other side of the community, with the ones that may not agree with the the primary vehicle. So that's like the nuances and details that I think is a great problem to have, because first of all, it establishes that community input is very important. It is required in all projects. But then there's this other aspect of it, which the public testimony that comes as part of PDC, it's on top of all of that. So it's great to have an opportunity for multiple voices. They're considered in the vote, and maybe there's a condition of approval that this particular issue that somebody had gets further studied. So it's a requirement, it has teeth, versus being like, oh, okay, we heard you, we're not going to do anything about it.
But like you have been you've been like two sides of the same coin, because when you were at DATNA, you were working for EDC, and when you were at EDC, you were working with the consultants. How has this, urban decision-making process, how is it different? Like, you can shed that story or that, that light on, especially since you have worked in New York City. Is it any different, or, working from the consultant side and working on the government front now?
Oh, it's completely, it's very different in that you get to know what all the different parameters are that are being considered in decision making. So while I was at Datner, working on the Made in New York campus, which is going to be Bush Terminal, it's on the waterfront, it's going to be a film hub, and there's going to be economic jobs that come up. But while working on that project, it was like, okay, we're doing the technical analysis, we're making presentations, we send it to, the agency. My supervisor was like, oh, there's this strange thing that happens. You make these presentations and then they look at it, but they make something completely different and they don't show you what is being made. And I was always like, that is a funny anecdote, because when I was on the other side, I realized what it is that they were doing with the consultant work. So when you're on the consultant side, you think it's just like, the work you produce becomes the thing that they take and go on. But it's so much more complicated than that, because it gets put into a narrative for like 8 different stakeholders. Like the way you communicate that technical analysis to the community board will be different than to like a city council member, to another commissioner, or to, the deputy mayor. It becomes like 8 different versions of the same story, but told in a way that it gets buy-in. So that consensus building and the kind of art of diplomatically negotiating like the aspects of the programming is an art in itself. And I don't think you don't face that while you're working on the projects as a consultant. You don't face any of the kind of high level politicking that happens to make projects happen. And there's a lot of that I now face, and I'm like, that makes sense why this took 10 months, but it shouldn't, but it does, because there's too many stakeholders. So yeah, sometimes these processes can lengthen the time frame, but if you think about buildings, they last forever. So it's important that there's a process in place to ensure long-term, appropriateness.
I mean, I echo the same sentiment, because, having worked in India and now working with a city agency here, I see that, community engagement is so essential in the approval of any project, or any project to just move ahead. And I had not seen such involvement at the ground, when I was working back in India. So that's it. And it's kind of interesting now that, I'm also participating in the Forefront Fellowship with the Urban Design Forum. I was aghast at, that there are so many small nonprofit organizations. They're basically, activists that are just voicing their struggle with inequality in New York City. And with the rising rents recently, especially after COVID, we have seen a boom in, the rental properties up this, and with the influx of immigrants. It's crazy at this point. So I think I would also like to bring in Harsh. Harsh, since you are in Toronto, but you have worked in Argentina, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find any difference between the cultural or, the geographies of working?
So it's a very interesting, like the way it sort of ended up, like the whole thing came up to be, and I was not expecting to be working in a place like that. But when you work in Global South, and that's the term that we urbanists often use, in Global South in itself, there are sort of this some form of drivers that sort of run, your projects and how things are done in a way. The problem in global south will always be the financial aspect of and funding part of the projects. You have to really find a way of, why would a city council would be interested in people with demographic from lower class and people that are living in informal settlement, even though there is an understanding of they want to do it, but they, for political reasons, it's very difficult. So I feel that there is, that is something that I have experienced back home in India as well, in itself. Those are some of the key aspects in it that I really feel that, you have to really work in a project. So that's why the work we did in Port of Buenos Aires, we had to, design it on the levels of how this infrastructure was going to be beneficial to the people in port authority, in airports, but also actually having that trickle down effect. I know trickle down economics is in itself is a very controversial subject, but moving beyond that, there is also like the infrastructure that can have that impact. So we went from the port, big ship, to all the way to the bus system. So in itself, I feel I have had the similar experiences of working in India with the same. It's always been, when you look at the politicians, when you look at the city council, they've always said, if you don't have the money for it. So it's always an issue. And also the public participation. I think Mitali and Shrija has said brilliantly, like, about the problems, the barriers that we face in US. But that sort of thing is not necessarily the case in India. And the public participation is really less, which is the sad part of it. This is exactly why we need to, as urbanists, need to actually get other people involved in these stakeholders that are neglected, need to be brought to the fore for the projects. So these are sort of some of the similarities that I feel that exist. And I wish it.
I think we have all come to an agreement that obviously urban design is all about community engagement and involving them at all levels, I would say. But I think since Mitali and Harsh have already shared their inputs on working with the private sector. But Sriyoshi, I want to ask you, do you prefer working with a public agency now, or do you see yourself moving to a private sector again?
That's a very loaded question.
And how easy would it be for prospective students or people who are looking to move from India over here? How easy is it for them to get through a city agency? Although I know that city agencies do not, sponsor people. So, yeah.
So I think both sides are completely different and have its own merits. One part of your question was for people coming new to the city. I think we're starting in the private sector is better to get the experience of how things work, because my 3 years at Datner in the private sector really helped shape like the foundation of the knowledge I had required to then go be in government. Because what I was working on was I had to speak to a lot of architects. I had to know the kind of issues they face too and kind of represent them, but only in government so that they get their work done faster. So it was good to have that kind of precursor to that. And even before Datner, all my work in internships throughout both degrees was in the private sector. I really don't know how I landed here. But now that I am here, I think you can make more impact at a larger scale if you're in government, because you see a lot more and you work with a lot more people versus the typology you might be working in the private sector. But again, it depends. If you're working for a very large company, you work with government. It's all tied together. As for where I think I would be headed next, I'm just not sure yet. I think that's going to require some soul searching, because now that I have kind of seen how politics play into our public spaces and how things really work on that level, it's going to be hard to kind of leave all that and go back to working on one thing at one time. But I also do miss holding the pen and making the 3D models. Like I do miss the content of it. So TBD, to be determined.
Interesting. Yeah, I know working with the city agency, I've realized you need to be more diplomatic and you need to understand policy much more better. Whereas when I was also working with a private firm, you didn't have to bother about politics or bureaucracy and everything. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, every step it's a learning process, and every day you just learn so much. But I completely echo what you said, that you should definitely start with a private firm, because I started with a private firm and the knowledge that I gained there was immense, and it actually helps me now where I am. So yes. I would like to open this session to our audience, and if you have any questions to any of our panelists, you're more than welcome.
I guess there is already one question in the
Where
chat
is
box.
it in the chat? In the chat box?
Yeah, from Sandeep. So he
Can
said
we?
that,
I mean, Sandeep can come in, and he can also just quickly
yeah.
introduce himself, and this way it would just become more interactive. I feel.
Yeah.
Sandeep.
Sandeep, maybe he has left. I don't know.
No, I
Anyways,
see him. I see him there, but he just unmuted. Sandeep, do you want to ask, or should we ask on your behalf? I think he's feeling shy. Okay, Devine, why don't you go ahead?
no, you are not audible. Yeah, some problem, I guess.
I think there are a couple of people who are trying to speak. Yeah.
Anyway, so the question is, he wanted to hear about the nature of urban design practice across, and your opinion for urban design profession potentially emerging and evolving in India. So it's more related to
Then I think we
future
have
of urban design practice.
We have such eminent professors and professionals from India, maybe who can answer that better, right? But we would, I would encourage, if you have any questions about, the US and global South or global North, which is focusing today on America, North America and South America. So
Niyanta, can I actually ask a question to that question? I appreciated that, because I've been thinking about urban design in India and how it might change. And let me know if you think this comparison is totally nonsensical, but I really find, the era of Robert Moses in America and then Jane Jacobs and then what happened after to be really fascinating as a study. And I recently watched the Broadway show about all of this. And I think India is in some ways in the Moses era. You could totally, completely shatter whatever. I really, this is a personal thing. And I think there needs to be like kind of the Jane Jacobs, but in like a way that really grabs on and shows that there's a real return on investment in having community input, and what is that in like financial terms, so that the developers can agree, perhaps, because everything is changing. The economics is changing, the infrastructure is so much more, but things are happening in islands. So like for me, I really hope that there's the kind of shift and change, given the fact that US has been through this. I look at it in the archives of my own agency. Like we've been through the kind of infrastructure planning where communities were not really integrated, and then we've been to the complete other side. Like it's a trajectory. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But
yeah, and if I can just echo those thoughts as well, Sriyoshi, like when I worked in China, it was like public process was absent. And, we saw just how quickly like traditional architecture and urban design can just fall apart with the kind of new towns that they were developing, because they were just looking towards their version of the Western model, which for them felt like the developed way to transform their cities, which is completely wrong. So in a way, like our work for India, especially, I don't think it's happening at the same scale or at that same speed as it did in China. And I'm talking about like, say, 7, 8, 10 years ago. It's kind of improved since then. But there's such a real danger of designing around the car, of moving away from the way our cities have traditionally functioned. And it's very, very difficult to revert back. So that retrofitting process can take decades. So it would be very gratifying to not see the same mistakes getting made, which the US has made like many years ago and is now trying to improve upon, but it's hard. And there's never enough money, as Harsh pointed out as well. So I would really, really hope that India doesn't repeat those mistakes in the speed of trying to change.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add to that, it's basically I've been lucky enough to be involved in some of these kind of projects in terms of where they have looked at community participation, they have looked at community building. The problem in itself is because we are such a big country and we are such a big population, one or two projects here or there are not going to cut it. And it in itself, like Shriyoshi says, that the return of investment in itself is such a crucial thing. You really need to, even like the pedestrian bridge that we built in itself needs to have like an advertisement boarding on it to get the public funding, way of financing a small project such as like that, if you look at in the whole picture of the whole thing. So I fully agree with that, and I just hope that, yeah, I mean, this is the whole point. Like, I hope the new generation, the next generation that is coming, is more has an intuition towards that, and they kind of force more and more people get into the public service, actually change and go with a different mindset, because we are definitely in Robert Moses era at the moment.
Yeah. We have another question from Ronak. He's asking, since AI tools are coming to forefront of everything, how is the use of AI tools being utilized in private and government city planning agencies with respect to better success in new projects, community involvement? Basically, how is it being used in Western countries?
Well, I can speak a little bit about that because the kind of projects that we do, especially like some of my recent projects, have been citywide analysis. So, trying to find like where are the priority areas where housing can work. So we're dealing with a lot of GIS analysis and data. So the interesting thing, and also, we want to make sure that what we're proposing, which are essentially like combinations of different housing types, can it actually work on existing city lots? Like, I can say that you build a fourplex in a certain location, but if the lot is not big enough, it's not going to fit. So the implementation can get compromised. So recently there have been some efforts from programs such as Esri, so, GIS-based software, which can do a lot of that modeling very quickly. But the caveat is, so it looks very glamorous, and that, within like a week you have you can explore the delta of what exists in terms of capacity for new housing, for example, and what can actually be supported by current infrastructure and things like that. But we still have a lot of work to do in that department before we lose our jobs, essentially. So that's a good thing, because the models don't take into consideration a lot of factors which are key. And let's just say it's early stages. But yes, AI does pose a threat to some things for sure, but I think our jobs are safe for right now. But it's starting to happen. So it'll be very interesting to see just how intelligent truly the system can get over the next few years or so.
Harsh, Hiroshi, Nyanta,
Yeah.
from
Shriyoshi, you go ahead, please.
It's going to be short answer because it's not very much used right now in government. Perhaps behind the scenes where staffers are using it to.
I haven't come across in city agencies or even in immediate private consultants like that we know. It has not really but sorry,
go ahead.
Harsh, go on. Go ahead. No.
So I was going to say, like, as Shriyoshi was saying as well, it's not being used, but in some companies, in some private companies, such as ours, Jacobs is in itself, it's predominantly a very key tool that we implement, and in itself that we sell as a product to our clients as well, which many a times are the government. So what Dali was saying, that we can actually identify the regions and the areas that where the development can go and what kind of development can go. But my only thinking behind this in itself is, in terms of like coming for our jobs and everything like that, I still feel like the concept of placemaking, understanding of that area, and the context in itself is still something that is unique to us in that sense. And I feel AI is not ready for that yet. Of course, it might be in future, but yeah, and we've had like a lot of projects where I have personally worked with City Engine and GIS, where we have basically developed areas and use that AI to understand how many people can live in a particular neighborhood and what we could do and how we can alleviate some of those housing issues. So I think that could be something that hopefully comes into the future. But then again, it's all about the money, whether the finances, whether they have the governments have the money to do it, and if they do, then you can see it more happening in future.
Yeah, and my hope is that, rather than this becoming like, often people get fixated on numbers, especially like, say, at the adoption process for many plans in the US. Like, if the city council is given a figure, which may be completely based in, just one of these AI tools, then they kind of gravitate towards it that, oh, we can get 40,000 additional housing units, over the next 20 years. But at times it doesn't consider like there are many kind of steps which are kind of skipped when you just rely on a scenario modeling tool, which is just using AI, and it's supposed to be a base for us to begin our discussions. But at times it can be misunderstood that, okay, this was a definite figure that I heard. And, people just kind of hang on to that number. So I think in a way, it'll have to be important for urban designers and planners, at least in the US, where AI is starting to make its presence felt, to kind of be engaged in the process. Like, let's not move away from it. Let's kind of work with it so that we can kind of use its functions, but to present the data in a way that is actually more accurate, and which takes into consideration not just the placemaking, but also what we know is realistic in terms of phasing and how cities function.
Okay, that's, I don't think we have any more questions, but I would definitely like to ask one question.
I have one.
Sure. Ashok.
This is Ashok from Hyderabad. Hi all.
Hi, Ashok.
This is Ashok from Hyderabad.
Hi, Ashok. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah. So, how much of the speakers who presented aware of smart cities in India, and what is the opinion of the way in which the smart city projects are happening in India? Any response to that?
So I have a personal experience of working on smart city projects in India. Jacob in itself has worked with NIUA, which is our Urban Development Authority, there are a lot of industrial corridors that are being developed at the moment. And one of the projects that I was working was in Kerala, in Palakkad area region. In terms of the development in itself, I feel that we are accelerating it quite quickly, but again, sometimes we are a bit too focused on infrastructure delivery solutions, and we are using numbers as a way of getting to our final goal. That part of the concept of smart cities doesn't have to be just about the technology. It has to be about the people as well. And at times we try to in my past we try to include the community, but sometimes it's a bit difficult as well. A lot of our smart cities are also not retrofit. They are being built in a new space in itself. So that in itself also poses a big challenge. We are not retrofitting New Delhi. We are not retrofitting Mumbai. We are not working on those kind of things. So it's a different kind of challenge at the moment, and it could get better. I feel it would get better. I'm an eternal optimist about that. And I hope it gets better. But the conversations will happen a lot more when we are talking about sort of the established cities. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
No, that was, yeah, I think it was pretty well said, Harsh. But I think we don't have much time left, and I think she needs to leave also. So just one last question, I think, because I think I'm a desi ultimately. coming here, initial few years were very tough because I had to find my cultural grounding. I was really away from my roots, away from my family. But I think I would like all our panelists also to chime in, but I also want to tell everybody out here that you will find so many Desis here. You will never feel alone or lonely or disconnected. We have such huge communities, people representing from North India, South India, everywhere. And I think you will never be lonely in this country. I would also want Sriyoshi, Harsh, or Mitali to just, throw some light.
Happy to kind of lead us off, and I'll echo what you said, Niyanta. But I mean, I also want to point out another thing, which is that I have worked like in different cities and lived in different cities in the US, and I didn't really have, like, definitely not in Boston, I didn't have an existing Indian or Desi kind of ethnicity, not specifically just Indian community to kind of interact with. Over time, I found people, but I do want to say one thing, that I've lived and worked in Boston for a bit, and then I've lived and worked in San Francisco, and right now I'm in Berkeley. And in all these places, I've actually formed very strong friendships with non-Desis as well. Somehow, I mean, I guess it depends on where in the country you're living, but I have never, honestly, and this might not be true for everyone's experience, but I've genuinely felt very much accepted and part of other groups. So, at times it can be a deterrent, like, for someone who's thinking of starting life in a different country, especially right now we're talking about the US, but in places where they may not be like a strong Desi community to welcome you. But honestly, I mean, frankly, I've had a very good experience of assimilating, in a way, without really kind of letting go of my root values. But, and I would say right now it's easily 50-50 or 60-40 in my kind of Desi and non-Desi friends. But I think part of my mission is converting my non-Desi friends to more Desiness, whether it's like celebrating Diwali or things like that. So, and they're very open. That's what I've found. So,
I think that's very rightly said, that, it's not the same across this continent. It depends on which place you are. I've specifically been in New York, so it's very different. But yes, there are places where, you can feel very isolated in this country, not to, please everybody that, you will find everybody here, you'll have family, you'll have friends, but it's not the same. You do feel isolated at times, especially when you don't have family. But I think making friends as whether it is at your work, whether it's your neighbors, you have to, kind of find those connections. But yeah.
And it's even more in Argentina.
I can imagine. Yeah, it was interesting to hear about what your experiences were like.
Yes, one more minute. I think Sriyoshi wants to leave. Sorry, 1 second. Sriyoshi.
No. I just have to be somewhere at 10:30, but I just wanted to thank all of you. That it was such a fascinating conversation, and I really learned a lot from you, Mitali, and her. So I hope others also learned about the diversity of experiences possible here. And I think now I have 2 little boys, and they're both, my mission is to see how to get them to learn more about India's culture. And I'm really happy to say that, like, everybody's really open, and it's I think in New York, it's, a whole different conversation, but in the East Coast, and it's great. So I would encourage everyone to be open about it.
Thank you so much, Sriyoshi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, guys. Okay.
No. Thank you so much. Okay, Harsh, sorry.
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge in Argentina was they speak Spanish, but they don't speak Spanish because their Spanish is absolutely different to other countries' Spanish. The Spanish dialect, the words are different. I would say something and they would be like, "You are not from here." I'm like, "Of course I'm not from here," but they could make it out that even if you know the language, it itself is an issue. And but like Mitali said, I think there is an opportunity in that where you don't have people, you make circle, you meet more diverse group of people, and that basically not just opens the door for your work, but also opens your mind as well quite a lot. I have great Peruvian, Chilean, Bolivian, Venezuelan friends that I can call call up after a couple of months to catch up on what's going on, what's happening. They kind of, and Argentinians, they kind of ended up becoming a part of that my family, you know. It's a bit tough there. It's a bit difficult. Don't get discouraged if you don't have if you don't see people that speak your same language or have the same culture. But please have some of that patience and openness to open up to other people and other languages and other cultures. And I feel like you will be, at the end of that journey, would be a lot more rewarded as an individual. And I feel that is something that you could do. And you could go to any part of the world, and I'm telling you right now, you will find people that will support you, help you. And food is the best way of connecting with people. I'm a big foodie, so use that as a common denominator for all your conversations.
I think you ended it on such a brilliant note, Harsh.
I agree.
Yeah, true.
Yes.
Okay. I guess this is the right moment to then, I guess, close our session today. Thank you, Mithali, Harsh, and Sruchi already left, and Niyanta, of course, for making this discussion so lively, entertaining. And we will be back with our next event soon, as Arunav sir was mentioning, maybe with Infinitum second version in January, and we'll be sharing more details. Till then, yeah, have a nice weekend. Enjoy your life, and we will be sharing more details. Keep
Yes.
following us. Keep following you,
Yes.
IUDI.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
guys.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.